Hey everybody, I am so excited to be with you today. I have a very special guest in a couple of minutes, Terry Cole, who is the author of this brand new book called Boundary Boss. My goodness, the world needs this now more than ever. But before she comes on, I'm waiting for her to ask, but I'm early. I always like being early. We have a 30-day happiness challenge coming up May 15th. So we are actually going to be on, I'm going to film it for 5 to 15 minutes every day, May 15th to June 15th, to sort of shake the pandemic cobwebs out of our mind and get seriously happy. So Terry just asked to join. And there she is.
Hello.
Hello, my friend.
Hi there. I'm so into shaking off the pandemic cobwebs. I cannot wait for 30 days of happiness.
I am not hearing you clearly.
Huh. Is it my headset?
There, that's better.
Oh, okay.
I think, like all relationships, it just takes a minute to connect.
You're funny.
So, Boundary Boss, brand new book, just out last week, has got great reviews. And I already texted it to a number of my friends who desperately need it. I mean, like, who doesn't need it? And I was just thinking, sort of the marketing language is for women, but my wife would tell you I clearly need this book.
Yeah, I think everyone needs this book to a degree. I mean, we all need help with boundaries for sure.
Well, as you start out in the beginning of the book, it's like there's an evolutionary need to be accepted. Because if you're not accepted by your group, you could die. And but sometimes that causes us to overdo for people. So let me introduce you more properly. Terry Cole is a psychotherapist. She's an author. She's a podcaster. She's worked with just some amazing people. She and I have worked together, and I couldn't be more excited to spend this time with you.
Well, thanks for having me, Doc.
So in reading the introduction, I sort of got why you would want to write this book. And I actually don't think I know anybody besides my father. He had very good boundaries. His favorite word when I was growing up was no. And his second favorite word was bullshit. So bullshit, no, that's what I heard. And actually, in thinking about it, he had rigid boundaries, which are not always that helpful, right? If your first thought is no, then you often don't let people in, which can be trouble. But talk to me about why you wrote this book and what you want people to take away from it.
Okay, I'm going to start with people are asking where to get the book, anywhere books are sold. And you can also, if you want to get the bonuses, go to boundarybossbook.com. boundarybossbook.com. Also, it is out in audio, it's out in ebook, it's out in all of someone else asked about audio. So, all right, why boundaries? Well, as you can imagine, and what I tell in the book, I was really a boundary disaster because many of us, women in particular, but men as well, But women are really raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. Like, we get this message early on that the more you sacrifice, the more you keep the peace, don't make waves, don't be difficult, be happy. Think about things that you say to little girls, like, where's my happy girl? You're like, well, I'm crying. Why do I have to be happy? Or turn that frown around. So for me in my childhood, I was really a pleaser. I was a people pleaser. I mean, this was how I got this positive feedback. I was a pretty happy kid, and I was, I mean, I wanted my folks to be happy, my mother in particular. But, things that are adaptive in childhood can become maladaptive in adulthood if we don't sort of relook at them and go, oh, is this still getting me what I want? So my own journey, I started therapy young. I was in college still. I stopped drinking my senior year of college. I had 3 months left of my senior year because I have a long line of alcohol, a lot of alcoholics in my family. And that really, talk about suddenly going through life with eyes wide open. It was like, wow, how much I was numbing with drinking, just numbing feelings I didn't want to feel because I didn't have the language to manage my relationships healthily. There was a lot of conflict in them. So, I went on my own therapeutic journey, and I actually was in entertainment for many years. I was a talent agent, negotiating contracts for supermodels and celebrities before. My own journey in therapy made me just go, this is amazing. Like, there's got to be something more productive maybe, or more meaningful to me. Now, I'm not anti-entertainment at all, but than making supermodels richer. Like, please don't let this be my dharma. I want to be doing something else. So I became a psychotherapist. And as much as I'd been working on my own boundaries and started to have an understanding of what they were, when I opened my therapy practice, I really saw that every person who walked in the door, whatever their presenting problem, it could be conflict in their marriage, it could be addiction, it could be, not making the money that they should be making because they can't, raise their prices, whatever their problem was. I could follow those dots backwards to the same exact lack of this skill set, being able to establish, communicate, and uphold appropriate boundaries in their relationships. So my definition, the way that I describe it and how I teach it, because it's got to be actionable, right? I feel like boundaries has a bad rap. People think it means you're rejecting people or bawling people out all the time, or like you said, saying no, 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 saying bullshit, 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 which is not necessarily accurate. And it certainly doesn't need to be that way. So my definition of having healthy boundaries means that you know what your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, like your non-negotiables, are, and you have the ability to readily and transparently communicate them if you so choose. So that is my definition of having healthy boundaries. It really means letting the people in your life know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. And we've learned, I mean, growing up, not only did most people not learn the language of boundaries, how to simply talk true, as the subtitle of the book says, but we learned the opposite. We learned that being a people pleaser and really prioritizing other people's feelings above our own means you're a good person. That's the way to be loving. And yet, of course, that complicates the crap out of trying to establish, healthy and satisfying relationships in life.
So you have a concept in the book I actually like a lot called internal boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
That when people think of boundaries, they think of how they interact with other people. But so many people are just flat out abusive to themselves.
Yeah.
And the language they use, how they attach to certain thoughts in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that? I thought that was just so helpful.
Sure. And it's funny, we start with internal boundaries in the book because, this is a lifelong, I think, listen, having real boundary skills is a lifelong endeavor, just like anything else, right? You're always evolving, getting better at it. But until you actually understand, figure that out. Because if you relate to yourself like you treat yourself like crap, you talk badly about yourself, you've got a really loud, inner, mean person, there's this reality that you're setting the bar in life. Your relationship with yourself sets the bar, according to me, for every other relationship that you have. So if you talk badly about yourself, you think you're not worthy, you put your last on your own list, you don't have good self-care, you're abusing yourself, as you said, you will inevitably attract others who are very much willing to agree with your low self-assessment. And so a lot of times, if we don't get our internal boundaries together, and I'll explain them a little bit more fully, but what happens is we're looking outside of ourselves for someone to sort of save us from us. And yet there's no amount of love from someone else, and there's no amount of overworking or success or achievement that can fill that particular space that only self-love and self-knowledge can fill, So we set ourselves up to fail because if you're saying yes when you want to say no, right? If you're not resting when you're exhausted because someone else asked you to do something and you're doing it, because this is a lot of what I see and have seen in my practice is the overfunctioning, the overgiving, the overfeeling, right? Because there's so much codependency. We're taking on the problems of others, feeling like that's ours to fix. But there's only so much bandwidth you have in life. So I have different ways in the book for you to sort of figure out how you are relating to yourself. How often do you say, I'm going to stop this unhealthy behavior, whatever it might be, or I'm going to get out of this toxic relationship? And how often do you then not follow through with those things for yourself? And I found it to be very common that I would have clients who were very trustworthy in other relations, meaning they would show up for others way more readily than they could or would show up for themselves. But that has to be the beginning of the process. Because when you really think about it, in general, if you're saying yes when you really want to say no in your relationships, that literally means your yes can't be trusted and neither can your no, which really means that you can't be trusted to talk true, as I would say. People don't know. And trust me, your friends all know. When I was in my 20s, I was such a yes person. I would agree to do like 7 things in one night when I was in college. And of course, not go to 6 of them, but only go to the one. So I have friends like that now who they say yes because I know they're people pleasers. And I think to myself, there's about a 42% chance that she's going to show up. Because what happens when we commit to crap we don't want to do is that we either find a way to like have a migraine, quote unquote, right? So we like cancel, but really we become people who are other people can't count on, but we can't count on ourselves. So it's a really important foundational part of this journey of learning the language of boundaries, raising your boundary IQ. And I really look at boundaries themselves as a language. And you certainly wouldn't expect to be fluent in any other language that nobody taught you, right? You wouldn't make yourself feel bad because my clients are like, I'm just weak. I always find myself in these terrible relationships with unavailable people. What's wrong with me? And I'm like, you don't know the language of boundaries because nobody taught you, but you certainly can learn. And that's the good news. And that's why I wrote a book about it.
Well, and it's certainly something people can learn. I think part of it could also come from less than adequate parenting. Parents who have no boundaries. I'm a huge fan of Jim Fay's book, Parenting with Love and Logic, because it's all about boundaries. It's about
Right.
what I'll do and what I won't do. And I actually don't do things for children who are not nice to me. It's
You're like,
just,
this is voluntary.
it's so clear. But if you grow up with parents who are laden with guilt, who do everything for you and then make you feel awful in the process. You don't learn healthy boundaries. Now, you also talk about different kinds of boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, mental
Mm-hmm.
boundaries, and emotional boundaries. Can you talk about that just for a bit?
Sure. I mean, understanding that there's like categories of boundaries, because again, there's this boundaries tends to be when people feel overwhelmed by it, like this amorphous thing that they're not sure what it is. But we can break it right down to physical boundaries, right? That's your biggest one is your body and how much space you need from other people, right? We're also individual. I think it's really important that we establish that there's no one size fits all for like the right boundaries for you to have. You are very unique. So if you need more space in a relationship, or if you physically, we've all had the experience where someone is too much of a close talker, you know, like they're too close to you, and we naturally will just step backwards. And then if they step forwards again, getting in our space, we may then say, hey, Bob, back it up a little bit. I'm feeling squished or whatever, however you would maybe nicely say that. But again, it's your right. So sexual boundaries are in the physical boundary area, which means you decide how someone touches you, with whom, when. It's always your choice. And with the physical boundaries, it's also your space. Some people's homes, you walk in and they say, hey, please take off your shoes, especially if you live in a city, right? Other people don't care. So communicating our physical and sexual boundaries is really important because it's so easy for to feel violated simply because someone can't read your mind. You know, they don't know. You might have a car that you like to keep clean. You might not want to lend your things to people, right? Someone may ask you to borrow money and you may go, I have a policy. I don't lend money to people because I'm protecting my relationships, which is definitely my suggestion that you don't lend money to anyone because it will almost always go bad. Um, we also have emotional boundaries, which means that you know what is your side of the street. So you're not blaming others for what's not happening in your life or what is happening in your life, but you're also not taking on the guilt. You were saying, you might have parents who guilt you, but when your emotional boundaries are solid, you can say, oh, hey, mama, I'm actually not taking that on. You chose that. That was free will that you chose that. You didn't tell me there were strings attached. So I'm sorry you're upset, but I'm actually not taking that on. So there's a way that we can not be sucked into these dysfunctional dynamics when we're really clear. Mental boundaries means that you know what you think, that you can hold on to what you think, even if you're with people who think differently than you, and that you can accept another person's no. So much of the time when we're boundary disasters, we're people pleasing left and right. And if someone says no to us, dude, that's like we're so pissed. People get so mad, like, Betty's got some nerve after everything I've done for her. Being a real boundary boss means that we accept that other people are different than us and that they have a right to their no, and that we can negotiate for our needs, but that's not the same as trampling on someone else's boundaries.
And then there are degrees. I like what you said. They're rigid, they're porous,
Mm-hmm.
or healthy,
Yep.
and they can probably shift depending on, is it physical, sexual, um, mental, or emotional,
And who you're interacting with, right? They
and
can
who you're
also.
interacting with and what you might want from them.
Mm-hmm.
If in my new book, I talk about your brain is always listening. I talk about the dragons from the past. And my primary dragon is the invisible, the abandoned, invisible, and insignificant dragon. So
Mm-hmm.
I've created a career on being significant. And
Correct.
so sometimes that'll clash right into what an appropriate boundary might be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my nieces were taken by Child Protective Services 4.5 years ago. And my wife had rigid boundaries with her family because she grew up in chaos.
Right.
And yet I get significance by helping people. And so I can't stand the fact they're in foster care. I'm like, no,
Mm.
how does that make any sense? That's a bad thing for them. And she's like, you need to back off. It's the worst week in our marriage. And we negotiated, we'd wrap services around her sister. And on Mother's Day 2017, she got the kids back. But it's been a boundary battle the whole time. And now the kids live with us, which will help them for generations.
Without a doubt.
Convinced. But I imagine there are a lot of boundary battles in
Mm-hmm.
relationships, depending on what you need, right? You know, my need to be helpful,
Right.
her need for safety
Yep.
can really get you to the marital therapist.
Yeah, though I think that you have your own, right? As you were saying, like with your dad and your life experience. I actually, by the way, love your new book. I was very privileged to have it early and I refer to it all the time. So anyway, um, you have your own, what I call your boundary blueprint, right? So this is your downloaded boundary blueprint in your unconscious mind. And it's like the paradigm that tells you this is the way to interact when it comes to boundaries. Whether it's not a conscious thing, but this blueprint is very ingrained and it's very influenced by your experience, right? Culture, country, family of origin, your role in the family, whether your family was chaotic or addicted or not, or very authoritarian, what number you were of kids, because I know you had a lot of siblings, right? All of these things come together and create this blueprint. So one part of the process of the book is that I give you the questions so that you can reveal your blueprint and make a decision. Like, oh, hey, that was like, picture it like this. It's like an architectural blueprint for a house that someone else designed, possibly like a century ago. And it just keeps getting handed down through the generations. Like, we're people who do this. This is how we handle this, like collectively. If it goes unexamined or unchallenged, it really does just become your reality, even when you say it won't. And Doc, you know this more than any. It's like, we'll say, I'm not going to repeat that. I'm not going to end up in a marriage where I'm bickering 24/7 with my spouse. If you don't do something to learn better skills, if you don't have some kind of interaction that will give you the opportunity to do it better, I promise you, you will end up in that bickering relationship because it just happens, especially when we're stressed. So this process of not blaming our folks, I mean, again, like none of this is like whose fault is this? It's more about, oh, now I understand. It was hard for me to say no because the behavior that I witnessed with my family was that my maternal impactor, let's just say, was someone who had the disease to please. So took that into my mind, right? When you're a kid, oh, this is the way it is to be a mother. This is the way it is to be a wife. This is the way it is. This is how I should behave. So we do a lot of excavating. It's like, imagine that I'm walking the readers down into their basement, which is their unconscious, with my little miner's light on, and I'm holding your hand. And we're just finding this information that is down there that will help you understand why you relate to boundaries the way you do without judgment. And one whole caveat for this whole book is that we're not judging. We are literally becoming the observers without judgment, but with curiosity. Like, I want to know why I am the way I am, because we must know that in order to transform anything, to change anything. Because how can we change what we're either in denial of or we're repressing? Obviously, we can't. So I think that what you're talking about with these conflicts, where what happens when a need, so Tan's need was for safety, your need was to save, and there was like, hey, we were bashing heads And so it's like, let's not do anything. Let's, like you said, it's rough, but let's talk it out. And when you learn the language of boundaries, when you can, you know, prioritize and negotiate for your own preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers. Because, like you said, not all boundary requests or desires are created equal. If something is a preference, I'll still ask Vic, you know, my husband, I'll say, hey, I would rather do this. Is that, can we do this instead or whatever? I'm always bidding for what I want in my relationship. I don't expect that every friggin' time I do it, he's going to be like, yes, princess, whatever you want. But how will he know, right? How will he know if I don't tell him? And one other thing I want to say, and then long way around the barn to get back to what you were saying, is that I had this very profound misunderstanding of the point of boundaries. I thought it was to kind of get what I wanted from other people. So having a similar father to you, different, but my father was very emotionally unavailable, workaholic, kind of like, Mad Men, you know that show? Like, those people who are martini drinking, like golfing on the weekends, wearing like khakis, like that was like my father. And he was someone who should have had boys, but had 4 daughters. And I thought if he wouldn't do the thing I wanted him to do, I told my therapist I was not inviting him to my grad school graduation at NYU. And she said, okay, why? And I said, because he won't come. He lives in Florida. He hates New York City. He had to go into the city for years to work, and I know that he won't come, so I'm not even going to bother. And she said, well, let me ask you something. Do you want to ask him? And I was like, I mean, I don't see the point, but I mean, yeah, I do. I'm very proud. I killed myself to get this degree, and I'm changing my career in my 30s. Like, I'm proud, and I would like him to be proud of me too. And she said, okay, well, you're going to visit him next week. It was like my annual visit. And she's like, I have homework for you. You're going to invite your father to your graduation before you leave his house. And I was like, oh my God, okay. So I do the whole trip, say not one word, dinners, walking on the beach, no words. And my father barely talked. Keep in mind, he was a man of very few words. So he's taking me to the airport. I'm literally I'm dripping sweat because I know I have to ask him, and I've got like 15 minutes. Like, I have to do it. And I said to him, finally, we're like literally pulling up. I was like, hey, Dad. He's like, yeah. I said, and I got an extra ticket to the graduation in May if you can make it. And he said, I really can't, Tara. I really can't deal with New York. And I was like, that's okay. No problem. And then he said something really odd. He said, here comes the guilt. As if I ever guilted him a day in my friggin' life. I said, no, Dad. But it opened up this dialogue where I was like, Dad, there's no way. I totally understand that it's a drill and that you can't do it. I really do. But here's the thing. You're my only father. So everyone else will be there, but literally no one can replace you. So I just want you to know how important you are to me, and that, our connection really matters to me. And he was like, I mean, again, had no idea the, emotional IQ of a sneaker. He was like, whoa, okay. But what happened from that moment is that those are words I never would have said to my father in my life if I had not been challenged by a therapist to do so. And when we were saying goodbye, he held on a little bit longer, right, than he normally would have. And then suddenly, in the next 6 months, he starts sending me like a card that's just like, love, Dad, like, just because. And I was like, what is happening? And we started talking on Sundays, which we had never done before, just the two of us. And again, mostly me talking, mostly him being like, sounds good. Like, he didn't suddenly grow like all these emotional skills, but it shifted our relationship. And 6 months, almost to the day that I left there, my father dropped dead suddenly of a massive coronary, and I never saw him again. And I was so grateful that we had that time. And what my therapist's point was, is that your healing is in the asking. Your healing is in the sharing, not really about what the other person does. And that changed my life, because I realized that me being known My father knowing that that was in my heart, that mattered. That changed my life and it changed the way I related to myself. So I share that story. It's also a story in the book because it's something that I think a lot of people think, well, I'm not going to ask because I already know what they're going to say, or I already know they're not going to do it. And you're like, but it's not about them doing it. It's about you negotiating to be seen, you know?
That is such a beautiful story. I love that story. Um, well, unfortunately, we're already out of time. It's
I
just my
know.
reason. Um, Boundary Boss, Terry Cole, highly recommended. How can people learn more about you and your work? And yes, they can get the book,
Mhm.
but there's more.
There's more. What I was going to say is you can go take a quiz that's free. If you're interested in your own boundary baseline, it's just go to boundaryquiz.com. It's just 13 questions. And I created archetypes, similar to your dragons, but different, where it's like you could be maybe you're the pushover or the chameleon or the ice queen or the loner. So you'll answer those questions, and I have videos explaining what your results are, which I feel like it's a great place for people to start. And yes, you can go to boundarybossbook.com. If you've purchased the book, we're actually doing a big virtual celebration tomorrow night. Anyone who bought the book gets a front row VIP seat in the party. So if you think you want to buy the book, I'd say do it today if you want to come to the party tomorrow night. Um, and, I have a course coming up that goes along with the book. There's many things. terrycole.com. You could find me. You find me on Insta at Terry Cole, just TerriCole. But I want to say one thing to Doc. I really appreciate you taking the time and being supportive of this work because you don't have to. And I really appreciate that you are. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I am thrilled to know you. And I know this book's just going to do great because it's needed by so many people. And like you said when we started, it's not about being mean. It's about being kind,
Yes.
because the clearer your boundaries, the clearer your communication, the more connected you tend to be in a healthy way. So thank you, my
Absolutely.
friend. I wish you great success and look forward to talking to you soon.
Me too. Thanks a lot, Doc Amen.
Okay,
Thanks, you guys. And yes, the audio is available for that person who asked. Just go to boundarybossbook.com.
great. And I'm going to save this and post
Please.
it in just a bit.
Perfect. Thank you, my friend. Bye.
Okay,
Bye, you
bye.
guys.